Well, it's good to be back. Thank you for the invitation back, and it's nice to see such a big turnout on such a beautiful day. I'll do my best to sort of scan the room and talk to everybody because I feel like I need to, and I want to share this message with everyone in the room. I have some notes I'll be reading off of, but I'm happy to see you all here tonight. I'm happy to give a talk on the psychology of healing. Psychology and healing, those are my two favorite subjects. I went to college and studied both. I got degrees in both of those because I thought you can't study just psychology, you need to study the whole person. Also, my other two favorite subjects are mountain biking and rock climbing. And I was going to try to work those in somehow. Let me see if this clicker's going to work. Oh, no. Maybe you can help with the... It might have gone to sleep. I don't know. It was working earlier because that's just how technology works.
Of course.
You can edit this out.
You ready to tell the joke, Jim?
I can tell. This is the joke. It's stalling right now. Like it should be happening right now. Anyway, maybe unplug and plug. Turn the car off, turn it back on, or whatever it is. How it works.
Okay. You have
That.
now? Okay.
Yeah. Now try the clicker. See what happens. That's the talk I wanted to give. The rock climbing psychology of healing on a mountain bike. Thank you, sir. Between you and I, rock climbing and mountain biking, they're extremely good for your health. But I thought, Brian said he'd probably say no way. Nobody's going to show up for that talk. So anyway, when I was asked to give this talk naturally, I was excited about that. I went to work brainstorming on what I could share. The fields of psychology and health are huge. So I spent a couple of weeks writing down some ideas, drawing mind maps, connecting authors and theories and research, and thinking about how I could condense somehow 25 years of study and practice into a 50-minute lecture. If you know anything about psychology, you know there are dozens of academic subdisciplines, right? Like organizational psychology, evolutionary psychology, positive psychology, even psychoneuroimmunology, which I would love to give a talk on that if you want to invite me back a third time. There's lots of illuminating and often surprising discoveries that are made in these fields, and they have the power to improve our lives. So naturally, I felt like a kid in a candy store when I started putting this lecture together. But when I sat down and started writing it, I noticed the lecture was getting longer and longer and longer and splintering off on all these many and varied paths. People are complex. If you really want to understand a person, you need to look at all sorts of things, like typologies, like personality and temperament. And then there's levels of development along distinct lines of ability. And we can't forget states of consciousness, not to mention social and cultural influences. And since we need to talk about the brain a bit, we can't exactly leave out biology. And well, you can see why I was starting to get into trouble. There's just too many things. There's all these deep and meaningful ideas that intersect and overlap with philosophy and theology, and many of the other sciences, which really do provide us with a robust picture of mental and emotional health, and which pretty well describe the whole process of healing. But that lecture was going to take a lot more than 50 minutes. It was going to take about 50 hours. And again, Brian wouldn't approve. When I told him my lecture notes were getting long, I think I remember him saying something to the effect of, "You can keep on talking, Jim, but I'm going to turn the lights off at some point." So I restarted the writing process. I said to myself, let me see if I can just focus on 2 or 3 really potent ideas. But wouldn't you know it, same thing started happening again. I was digressing, going down all sorts of interesting rabbit holes. Looking back now, I can see I was sort of stuck in this all or nothing schema of you can't hope to understand one part of the person without understanding the whole person, and the whole person in the context of their relationships and their culture and their environment, and that's how it goes. It's hard to stop. And so I asked myself, why is this so hard? So I stopped the writing process again. I erased everything I'd done. And then I finally did the one thing I should have started with. You know what I should have started with. I started praying. And I said a very simple prayer. I said, Lord Jesus, what do you want me to do with this lecture? And before I could even finish the last syllable of the last word of that sentence, I heard him say 3 simple words. Heal my people. Heal my people. Right, Lord. Great idea. I love that idea. That's what I want to do. Great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Okay, so how am I going to do that? And I spent the rest of that night wondering about how I could make a one-directional talk, not just a lecture about healing, but a healing message. And I got my answer later that night. Brian knows this story because I shared it with him. I woke suddenly in the middle of the night, sat up, and I very clearly heard in my mind the following words. I am the way, the truth, and the life, and the truth shall set you free. I sat there stunned for a moment, and I was actually smiling, because as soon as I heard those words, the entire outline of this lecture presented itself to me. So naturally at 3 a.m., I got up, jumped on my laptop, and wrote the entire thing straight through. Divine inspiration. I finally had my message. Not just a lecture about healing, but hopefully a healing message. So to that end, I want to give you just a brief overview of the talk and some of the lessons that I've packed into it. The first of which is this, which should be obvious by now. In whatever you do, from writing a lecture to finding emotional healing, let Jesus lead the way. Always. Always, always, always. Always let Jesus lead the way. And I know that phrase can sound like a kitschy lyric from a country western song. Just let Jesus lead the way. I don't know, somebody can come up with a melody for that. And I know that some who might hear this message, maybe not here tonight, maybe here tonight, don't know who Jesus is. They have no idea really who he is and what it would mean for him to lead the way. But I'm going to explain that as best as I can. And I'll talk more about how we can get out of our own way and let him do that. Now, I'm also going to walk us through many of the subtle ways we come into agreement with lies about ourselves and others. We're going to look at how and why we sometimes ignore or just plain hide from the truth, including our true self. And all throughout this talk, I want to show you how the particular choice of words we use when we communicate an idea, or even, and definitely more importantly, articulate a thought, very often actually belie the truth. And they get us into all kinds of unnecessary trouble. And there's a reason counselors can generally spot pretty easily where the problem is as soon as a client starts talking. And that's because we're listening to their words intently. And we've all learned to appreciate the phrase by now, hopefully, that words matter. It's true. Words really do matter because words reveal our true thinking. We do most of our thinking in words. It's how we articulate what we believe. Have you ever noticed how hard it is to try to communicate something to someone when you can't find the right word? The words we speak actually expose what we actually believe. And whether we know it or not, and whether we like it or not, it's not a stretch to say that it's our beliefs which account for much of, if perhaps not all of that which really matters here. So I think we would do well to reflect on the power of the words we use a little more often. Now, to drive this point home, this is going to be fun. We're going to explore that idea just a little bit further right now. So take, for example, the power of the first words spoken by God at the time of creation as recorded in Genesis. God begins all of creation by uttering 4 simple words. You know them. Let there be light. We all know the rest of that verse. And there was light. Words, wow, words are powerful, certainly for God, but even for us. We all know that with just a few simple words, we can build somebody up. You've got this. Or we can cut them down. Is that the best you can do? Consider how many have died violently in war by the power of this one word, attack. Or how many have found healing with this one, forgiven. Being made in his image, we would do well to reflect on the power and the impact of the words we use. Now, we're going to explore the power of words more. We're going to take a deep dive into my favorite fields of psychology, which are cognitive, behavioral, and existential. I'm certain that you will come away more convinced than ever that words matter more than we know. It helps us see what we really believe. After all, there's a huge difference between professing, I believe Jesus is a Son of God, versus I believe Jesus is the Son of God. Words matter. And I'm convinced it's not the eyes as the phrase goes, but the words that are the window to the soul. So let me take you back now to that answer Jesus gave me about how a lecture could be healing. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. It was the same response he gave to the Apostle Thomas when he asked how he might enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, Jesus responded to Thomas saying, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We all know this phrase. Those don't sound like directions. They don't even really sound like instructions. What kind of a response is that? I am the truth? It's kind of abstract. Nevertheless, I have always found it interesting that none of us could say the same about ourselves. None of us could say, I am the truth. At best, I could say I tell the truth, I believe in truth. Maybe even I will defend the truth. But not you, nor I, nor anyone in the history of the planet has ever been honestly able to say those words, I am the truth, except Jesus. And I'm starting with this point because ultimately, without us getting this very simple truth, that it's the truth that sets us free, and that Jesus is the truth, I'm not sure how much hope there is for us. If we can't see that it's the truth that sets us free in every circumstance, and if we can't eventually at least come to believe that Jesus is the truth, to know that, we're in for a long, painful ride. So let me share an illustration which may help explain this connection between Jesus and truth. When I hear him say the phrase, I am the way, the truth, and the life, it brings up for me an image of being in a ship at sea in a storm, trying to make port. And out in the darkness, I can just make out the faintest hint of light from a lighthouse. A lighthouse that will lead me safely ashore, where I can dock my ship and find rest. In this picture, I am that ship at sea, sometimes being tossed painfully in the storms of my life, physically, emotionally, and otherwise. In that image, obviously, Jesus is the lighthouse, this monolithic, unmoving light post that does two things. It confirms where I am and where I need to go. He's not just a teacher of truth, a man pointing toward the lighthouse. He is the lighthouse. He is truth itself. And the way is the light that shines from that lighthouse. That's his life and his teachings. The light that shines is that narrow but essential ray which shows me exactly how to bring my ship in safely. And the harbor that I finally dock in, that's life. Hopefully life eternal. A place where I can rest, maybe even celebrate the journey. It's a divine and perfect and unending relationship with my fellow sojourners of truth. Now, we know the truth never promises to be easy. As Christians, we fully understand that the fallen world we live in is a cultural tempest. Father Steve often preaches about this fact, but we all know it. We know we're in a ship that will most certainly pitch and fall in the many vicissitudes of life. And Jesus did not create this storm. We did. It's our own deceitfulness and malice that have created this world we live in. Maybe not just those in this room, okay? But you understand what I'm saying. We did. Now, it's not just the big bad world out there either. I'm talking about the world inside and the world of just our close personal relationships that we live in daily. Our God will not magically erase what we have created. He has not zapped us of our free will. Nor can he change the nature of the storm we live in, but he is most certainly the lighthouse that we can follow to come safely home. I'm convinced that none of us really wants our ship to sink at sea. None of us really wants to drown. We want to be free, yes, free from pain. But none of us wants to live a lie, really. None of us crave ignorance, do we? Or worse, do we hunger to be lied to or to be deceived? Of course not. And none of us wants artificial happiness, the ersatz happiness. None of us want fake smiles from our friends nor cold embraces from those we love. We want real happiness. We want real connection. And finally, no matter what your political bent is, none of us want fake news. We want the truth. We don't want to live in a world where all the lighthouses have gone dark or where we and no one pays them any heed. There is no one who wants to live, I hope, no one who wants to live locked alone in darkness forever. Again, I can only preach that it's the truth that sets us free. That's 25 years of academic study and clinical experience. That is what frees us. And by the same token, the other side of that, it's the lies that imprison us. Believing in lies leads us to living on the precipice of death. For example, if I believe it's true I can walk across 5 o'clock traffic with my eyes closed, am I going to live or am I going to die? If my doctor hands me the cure, but I believe it's poison, am I going to live or am I going to die? Here's the rock climbing one. If I believe I can climb a 3,000-foot vertical face in Yosemite Valley without ropes, am I going to live or am I going to die? I'm going to die. Now, at least one person can do that, right? But we can't believe it's you or I. What about the lies we believe that will bring us happiness? Many of us believe the lie that status and wealth will make us happy. If I believe that promotion or that salary will make me happy, or that dream vacation, or that perfect home set in the country, I'll be confounded. Because while those are all things we can be happy about, status, wealth, and material things are not the source of happiness and joy. There are plenty of people who are supremely happy without a lot of stuff. And there are plenty of the rich and famous who have climbed the material mountain of fame and wealth and have come back down empty-handed. We can't believe that lie that happiness is out there in things. We have a word for that. It's called idolatry, and we were warned about that a long time ago. Neither can we believe that something so noble as earning the praise, admiration, and respect of those whom we admire will bring us peace. Because if the person looking at me in the mirror doesn't respect himself, he really can't accept it from anyone else, can he? And if he does have self-respect, it won't much matter if it's acknowledged by other people. So it's a lie to believe that the source of our happiness is found in things, situating ourselves into a particular station in life, a place on earth, or surrounded by certain things. Though I will grant you, and I experienced it today, the created world in the entire universe is breathtakingly beautiful. But neither can we believe the lie that the source of our happiness is found in another person. Now, while the love that flows between you and I and between people, it reflects the love flowing between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And loving relationships bring glory and honor to God. Other people are not the wellspring of our happiness. Now, I say all that, and I know, I'm well aware that most of us in this room don't believe that things bring us happiness. Though if you peeked into our homes, you may find some evidence to the contrary. But we might be a little less inclined to believe that people are not the source of our happiness, or at least perhaps the cause of our happiness. So let's explore that a little. I think we can all agree that things do not bring us happiness, that the things, or even the lack of things, are not the real reason for our emotional pain. We can all agree that our joy and our freedom to love does not hinge on any created thing in the universe. In a similar way, neither does our joy or freedom to love hinge on any one person other than Jesus. If we stop and consider this, does it make sense that my path to joy or openness to love could be blocked by another human being, any human being? Or that my access to healing could be guarded by another creature? Do people wield such power over us? We might think they do, since so much of our experience of love and joy here rises and falls within the context of our relationships with each other. It's true for me. I've never experienced greater love in my life than the love I have for Christ and my wife and my son. And most of the other real and lasting joy in my life flows through my relationships, my family, my friends, the people I serve. But while it's true that the greatest love we know will flow through our relationships, we will be miserable without those. We ourselves are not the wellspring of that love. Christ is. It's God's love for us that flows between us. He's the source. All freedom, joy, healing comes from Him. But instead, so often I hear the lies where people pin the source for their joy and their suffering on others when they say things like, "My wife makes me so miserable," or "My boss makes life unbearable." Or even when they say things like, "My kids make me so happy," or "You make me so proud of you." People don't make feelings happen inside of us. Feelings don't originate outside of us. But there's more on that later. Love and healing can and often do flow through us, especially those of us who've dedicated our lives to that work in our professional world and in our own personal lives. But healing comes from the one true God, not shiny new things, better circumstances, or even the saints that might surround us. But let's test that theory on myself. We'll use my life as a case study. Growing up, I was a really happy kid. I had a great childhood. I had a mom, a dad, siblings. We had a house in the country where I played cowboy on a real horse. We hiked, we camped. I had a toy box overflowing with toys. I had my prized Star Wars sleeping bag. I had friends. I even had a best friend, Ryan Savinsky. In the summers, I would ride my Space Invaders bike to his house. And between our homes, there was a creek where we'd stop and catch crayfish and frogs and just explore the wilderness together. Life was perfect. But the year I turned 11, life started falling apart. And by the time I was 14, I had hit rock bottom. My parents were divorced. My father was missing in action. My mother supported us as best she could. We lost the beautiful house in the country. We were bankrupt, literally. We had to get food and clothes from the shelter, and we occasionally went without water electricity, and sometimes even food. My older sister immediately became drug addicted and bounced in and out of rehabs. And I was starting to hurt inside in places I didn't even know existed. I felt loved by my mother, but there wasn't a lot of evidence around to prove to me that I was loved by my father. Where had he gone? Why had he left? We'd see him sporadically, which might have been worse than not seeing him at all, because our hope would rise that he was back in our life again, only to fall again the following weekend when my mom would come out to the front porch and tell us, after we'd been waiting there excitedly for an hour with our clothes packed into those little brown paper shopping bags, that our dad had just called and that he wasn't going to be able to make it that weekend. Looking back now, I'm not so sure he ever really called. I think my mom just came and told us those things to protect us, to convince us that we hadn't been forgotten. But I felt forgotten, I felt neglected, I felt abandoned, and it showed. I didn't lash out at my siblings, or my friends, or even my mom, or my dad. He wasn't around enough anyway, and even when he was, all I wanted was his love and attention. Instead, I lashed out at myself. I went from a middle schooler who had been bumped ahead of grade and put in honors classes to a kid who in the 9th grade was skipping school, failing all his classes, and shoplifting. I was depressed and anxious. The only 2 real friends I had that period in my life lived in my neighborhood, but they went to different schools. And each of them hadn't seen their dad in months either. I think I chose to fail in school as a direct result of sort of challenging the worth that people said because I had this academic ability. And praise and accolades don't stick when you believe you're worthless. And I felt very worthless. So let's test that theory out here, right? What would have fixed my issues then as a 14-year-old kid? Were things going to heal my pain? Was a bigger toy box going to fix me? Of course not. Not all the toys in the world were going to fix me. What about a trip to Disney World? Would that have cheered me up? No. What about people even maybe like my best friend Ryan? Would one more summer on dirt bikes with him in the country, racing down country roads, heal me? Nope. Friends weren't going to do it. I had friends. And it was great not being alone, but we were all just lost and miserable together. What about my mom? Could she have healed that wound of abandonment? Almost. And she came darn close. And she tried hard. But it wasn't my mom who had the power to heal that wound. So I guess that leaves my father, right? I guess common logic dictates that the one who wounded me is the only one who could heal me, right? And I needed my father to heal me. I used to fantasize about him moving into a house on the same block as us down the street, and I thought, maybe we'll just get life back together, some kind of normal. I wanted stability and security again. I didn't want to go hungry at lunch. I didn't want to keep getting teased for wearing my older sister's jeans to school. I was tired of going without. But would that have healed me? Would him coming back into my life have healed me? Would him restoring financial security and stability to my family and maybe trying somehow to correct the mistakes of my childhood have healed me? Would him apologizing to me, trying desperately to earn my trust back, would that have healed me? Was there anything that man could have done to heal me? So stop and consider that for a moment. If my being healed from the wound of abandonment rested on that one man, would I be left with no cure if he never found his way back into my life or apologized? What if he died suddenly? Would my being healed hinge on the words or actions of another man? Was my father the cure? No. Why? Because he wasn't the poison. The poison was the belief that I was worthless. And that poison is what fueled my anxiety, my depression, and my reckless behavior. Did my dad give me a reason to believe it? Sure he did. But whether he did or didn't, a kid can come to believe he is worthless, even with all evidence to the contrary. My dad actually did eventually step up his game. And there was a real love that grew back between us, but that didn't heal me. I had already spent 20 years by then in patterns of self-defeating thinking and behaviors. I was overcompensating at work, at school, and even in my recreation to try and get that feeling that I mattered, that I was valuable, that I was special, that I was really worth something. And all that overcompensating, it actually got me some pretty useful academic accomplishments, some career success, some financial stability. I got the attention of my parents all right. It even got the attention of this beautiful brunette sitting down here. And a lot of good actually continues to come from all the neurotic work that I put in over those 2 decades. But none of that, none of the real love, the genuine love that grew in my life, it never even came close to addressing the problem. By all appearances, I was confident, if not arrogant. I was enthusiastic about life, and I was happy. But inwardly, I was absolutely still an insecure 14-year-old kid. I still believed I was kind of worthless, and I lived with an anxiety that people might see through the facade. We call that the imposter complex. That I'd be found out, laughed at, ostracized, and discarded once again. And I discovered the hard way that no amount of recognition, success, pleasure, or money, or being told I was special had changed that deeply held belief. My dad wasn't the only reason in my life I could point to for why I might have felt worthless. There were plenty of other reasons I could point to. And I did. An unrequited crush, a forgotten birthday, or even just the economic poverty that I lived in. But in reality, all I was doing by focusing on those negative things in my life was doing what psychologists call confirmation bias. I had essentially already begun to make up my mind, maybe I'm worthless, and then I just started cherry picking and focusing on the events in my life, which further proved to me that I was right. And when there was no data directly available, I'd just make up my own story. We all do this. I'd say to myself, for example, she's not interested in me because she got close enough to see there isn't much to like, instead of, maybe she's afraid of intimacy. Or, they forgot my birthday because I'm not worth remembering, instead of, they must be really busy and stressed. Or, my dad gave up on me because there's really nothing there for him to fight for, instead of, my dad doesn't have time to focus on me right now. He's fighting just to stay alive. He's overwhelmed with his own anxiety, depression, and issues of abandonment from an alcoholic and abusive father. And he was. That was the truth. You see, it's our made-up stories and the erroneous beliefs we hold on to inside of us that drive us mad. And I'm not going to tell you that fixing that is just as simple as making up a better-sounding fairy tale, or when we fill in the blank, or that we simply need to force-feed ourselves those ridiculous affirmations in the page-a-day calendars of wisdom. I got some for you. I am the architect of my life. I build its foundation and choose its contents. How about this one? Today, I am brimming with energy and overflowing with joy. And as a counselor, I got to tell you, this is the worst. I forgive those who have harmed me in my past and peacefully detach from them. Ridiculous. That is not how this works. Not even close. Now, I've been talking for a little while here, and I'd like to give us enough credit to say that the vast majority of us, we know better than all of this. We know better than everything I've already said. We know better than to make up stories and lie to ourselves. We don't do that, do we? Not even a little? Not even sometimes? Right? Most of us would reject out of hand the idea that we're liars. I'm not a liar. I don't believe in lies, most especially about myself. But is that really true? Are we not in some ways and at certain times, as famed psychiatrist and author M. Scott Peck put it as the title of one of his books, people of the lie? As a counselor, you'd be surprised how often I hear subtle, barely noticeable lies hiding in plain sight. In the language people use, think for a moment of the typical kinds of lies I hear from college students almost daily. Statements like, I'm not smart enough to do college, or I'm not a math person, or I only failed that class because my teacher didn't like me. I've heard it all before. Lies, all of them. And they poison the mind. They kill ambition. They leave that ship of the soul drifting listless and rudderless in the sea, devoid of any real power. Show me the student instead who says to herself, college is harder than I thought it was going to be, especially math, and whoa, some of these teachers have no people skills. And I'll show you 4 years later a college graduate. Beliefs matter, words matter, and the words we use to describe ourselves and our experience, they shape our fortunes and they strongly influence the lives of those we love. So is the psychology of healing really just about truth and lies? Yes. But to better show you that, let's take a deeper dive into our minds, our motivations, and our use of language to see if we can't better learn how to do our full part in bringing this ship to harbor. So to do that, let me go back to the title, Psychology of Healing, and explain what those words really mean. First, the word psychology comes from the Greek, psyche, which means soul, and logio, which means study of. A modern definition for psychology is the study of the human mind, emotions, and behavior. But a couple of hundred years ago, when that word was first coined, it originally meant not just the study of the brain and our behavior, but the study of the essence of a person, the soul of a person. And secondly, we have the word healing or health, which has its roots in the Old English word kailo, meaning whole or unharmed. And Merriam-Webster defines that health means being free from illness or injury. So literally, the psychology of healing means the study of a soul free from illness. Or since we counselors are less focused on the study of in favor of the practice of, for us, the psychology of healing means the practice of freeing a soul from illness, or, as I like to put it, the art of setting a soul free. If you've ever sought out counseling, you know what I'm talking about. You definitely sought it out to be free of some serious suffering. I know I have. Are there souls that need freeing? Of course there are. There are hundreds of millions, maybe billions, of people who experience ongoing mental and emotional suffering. Many are on that volatile roller coaster of unpleasant emotions. Many feel chained to those beleaguering, self-defeating behaviors like procrastination, overeating, addiction, or a sense of despair from which they are convinced they could never find freedom. How many trudge through the day in a melancholic cloud of regret, or jitter just inside their skin, hand-wringingly stressed over fears of the future? And if none of those, perhaps they are occasionally nagged by those shadowy yet incessant existential questions. Why am I here? Will I ever find any real joy or lasting happiness? Indeed, there are millions in the United States right now who daily suffer in this way. 19% of American adults suffer from an anxiety disorder, call it 20%. And when we look at teenagers aged 13 to 18, that number rises to 32%. 17% of us experienced major depression last year. By the way, in our clinical diagnosis, we can say mild, moderate, or severe. We're talking about major depression. 26 report binge drinking last year, which is why we get 34 million DUIs per year. 10% of the population uses illicit drugs regularly. 160 million of us are overweight or obese because only 20% of us exercise. We had over a million attempted suicides last year, which incidentally is more than all the people who die by heart disease and cancer combined. Not that many die from suicide, but there were 1 million attempts. There's about 40,000 deaths per year, 45, 50 now. At least half of all males are addicted to pornography. 11% of us are shopaholics. And when you ask us, 50% of us admit to being workaholics. So to put those numbers into perspective, if you work in an office with 20 employees, 3 are suffering from depression, 4 are suffering with an anxiety disorder, 5 are addicted to alcohol, at least 6 of them are addicted to pornography, 10 of them are workaholics, and 15 or 16 of them are living paycheck to paycheck. On the bright side, 4 of them will exercise this week. 6 of them will go to church, but only half of them will feel any real presence of God. Thank you, Pew Research Center and the National Institutes of Health, for the data. But how do we begin to even account for the more subtle but no less significant issues, like the unknown multitudes of us who won't do something as basic as freely express our emotions to one another? Or those of us who dare not complete an honest and searching examination of our conscience? Do we care about ourselves? Do we love ourselves? I bet very few of us, when we catch ourselves in that full-length mirror, stop and say, wow, amazing. How many of us wake up in the morning like I do and say, what? I get to be me again? Yes. And while some of us can say that we are free to love and be loved, none of us can say that we all feel that way. We don't live in a world where everyone feels that way. So the question has to be asked, why are we in such shockingly bad shape? Why are things getting worse? And they are. I'm not going to give you the research tonight. Look it up. It's true. And I know every generation has been saying that, but we collect data now better than we ever have, and it's getting worse. Well, why is hardly anyone talking about it? Now, our greatest philosophers, from Aristotle to Augustine to Aquinas, they've been working on these questions for centuries. And our most pioneering psychologists, even Freud and Jung, and Frankl and Rogers, they've been researching these questions for 200 years. They've covered a lot of ground, and they've unearthed some serious insights about the human person, and we'll explore their contributions in just a minute. But as we dive deeper into their somewhat varied insights, let me tell you what a review of all of their work would show you, and that's this, that it's the truth that sets us free. They have all argued in their own unique ways that it's the lies we believe and speak that bind us, that squelch any spark within us that could be fanned into the flame of a new creation. So I'm going to give you another case study which demonstrates how these subtle little lies sneak into our language, into the words we use, and in so doing, they arrest our development. They dash any hope of healing. So earlier this year, I was participating in a series of classes that met every week for a couple of hours. The typical class format was we got an hour of lecture, and then we all broke up into small groups to discuss the lecture, and then finally we got to practice some of the things that we'd learned. Well, one week the lecturer came in, and he spoke so long he didn't have any time left for small group discussions or practice. We got a great lecture, and then class was over. The very next week, the lecturer walks in, and to the assembled class begins with this declaration. We ran a little long last time, so we're going to need to play catch-up this week. Now, I'll tell you right now, there are already 3 monstrous lies in the first 4 words of that statement. I heard them immediately. Did you hear them? Maybe not, but that's my job. I'm a counselor. I listen for this stuff. I heard the 3 lies and understood the reason he spoke them before he even got halfway through that sentence. Now, I'm going to tell you what the lies were, why he said them, and then you're going to learn to be able to do the same. So let me repeat the first half of that declaration he made again. We ran a little long last time. And now here's the 3 lies. Lie number 1 is found in the use of the word we. How about that? We weren't responsible for the class running long. We had no part in that. If he were being honest, he would have said, I ran a little long last time. It was his fault the lecture went long. He should own the responsibility for what happened, instead of trying to share the blame with us. But taking on responsibility when we fail hurts. So we tend to avoid that when we can. Using second or third person pronouns when we should be using first person pronouns is a defense mechanism we call depersonalization. When I'm talking about myself and my behavior, I should use the pronoun I. To do otherwise is a defense mechanism which tries to exonerate me from any responsibility. Now, line number 2 is found in the use of the word ran. He said we ran a little long last time. Ran in this sentence is a metaphor, and metaphors approach the truth, they approximate truth, but they are not the truth. In our case here, in fact, no one was running anywhere. He was standing giving a lecture, we were sitting listening. It would have been more accurate, more truthful for him to have said, I lectured a little long last time. That's better. That's being more honest. That's being accurate. That's being specific about what happened rather than hiding behind some obtuse metaphor. He should have said, I lectured, instead of, we ran. I'm not a big fan of metaphors anyway, but even with those revisions, he's still not totally off the hook. The last lie in the first 4 words is found in the use of the word, you know what's coming, little. He didn't lecture a little long, he lectured a lot long. Using the word little in this way is what we call a minimizer. You know why we do it? Minimizers are words that help soften the sting of failure. We often like to use it with phrases like, it's only a little mistake, it's only a little piece of cake, I was only being a little dishonest. Saying the words, I lectured too long, is a world away from saying, we ran a little long. Can you hear the difference yet? You might think it's subtle, and you may be wondering, come on, Jim, do those kinds of words really matter that much? Do they really make that much of a difference? You tell me, does cleverly shirking responsibility, hiding behind obtuse language, or denying the full impact of our actions on others present a problem? Of course it does. And it's worth addressing in the small matters because the same thinking and language shows up in the big ones. What kind of world do you want to live in? The one where people take responsibility for their actions, or where they offload their behavior as it's somebody else's fault? You know, like Adam did in the Garden of Eden with Eve? You know that story. You remember how this blame game played out there? God asking, have you eaten the forbidden fruit, Adam? And him replying, well, Lord, she offered it to me. Remember that? Yeah, she offered it to me. I can just imagine God replying to Adam, though this is not recorded in Scripture. Oh, so it's her fault. What? You're saying I didn't build you with a spine in your back? Is that what you're saying? Or imagine Adam trying to hide behind obtuse, non-specific language. God asking, Adam, have you eaten the fruit? And him replying, well, Lord, all we did was sort of sample some of the produce around here. Oh, you just sampled the produce, did you? Is that what you'd call it? And just for fun, let's see if the use of minimizers could have possibly helped. Did you eat the fruit, Adam? Well, Lord, we only took a little bite. We didn't eat the whole thing. And him replying, okay, so you just barely broke the law. I suppose you'll accept that kind of logic from Cain later when he tells you he just barely murdered his brother. I just barely murdered him, Dad. I hardly murdered him at all. That sounds ridiculous. Because it is. Yeah, he's practically still alive. Thank you. It's those kinds of declarative statements that people make and have been making since the beginning of time that we're listening for. Counselors are listening for that stuff. You're all going to be afraid to talk to me after this. We're listening for you to say we when it's really I. We're listening for the lies. We're listening for the times when you catastrophize with words like, and I know no one in this room would be guilty of it, she always, or he never, or for the projections. Like when you say, they're the ones who are angry, right? Sometimes we just give all our power away with phrases like, I could never do that, or I had no choice. One of my favorites, reaction formations, like when we hide our true feelings in what is an otherwise socially acceptable response, like when we laugh, when we trip to hide our embarrassment. It's a lie. What about how we use our words to misdiagnose, not just our behavior, but those of the other people we live and work with? What about, for example, when we describe someone at work who has a hard time taking criticism as being defensive? We say things like, he never listens to anyone, he's always so defensive. When really what we ought to say is that they're afraid, right? I mean, when else do you find the need to defend yourself except when you're perceiving a threat? What if we dropped the descriptor defensive and threw away the catastrophized always from that declaration? How much differently would you feel toward and approach someone at work if instead you said, he rarely listens because he's afraid? Now, maybe most crushing of all aren't the simple ego defense mechanisms we use to protect ourselves or the pointing to someone's behavior rather than their motivations for the reasons they do the same. Maybe it's the personal lies particular to our own lives that chain us down. Lies like, I'm not lovable. I must be perfect. There's no hope for me. Or, this one I hear a lot, I'm powerless. Our clients rarely speak those truths outright. Instead, more often those beliefs slip out in our words, as Freud noticed in Our Choice of Girls. I mean words. Not in Our Choice of Girls, Our Choice of Words. See what I just did there? And if we've built up enough rapport as a counselor, we're going to gently challenge those lies. That whole process of challenging the lies we hear, in psychology we use the word irrational belief, we don't say lies, but that whole process is known as cognitive behavioral therapy. Or since we have to address emotions too, we call it rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT. REBT is based on cognitivism and behaviorism, those two sciences. So let's look at those for a minute. The word cognitivism comes from the Latin, which means to know, and is therefore the science of examining what we know or what we believe. And the word behavior arose in the 15th century in Britain from the two words be and have, which essentially refers to our ability to have ourselves or to govern ourselves. So cognitivism is the science of knowing, behaviorism is the science of doing. And all modern psychologists agree that behavior follows from cognitions. That is to say, that all our actions follow from our thoughts. It's never the other way around. We never engage in a behavior without a cognition powering that behavior. Something in the brain has to happen in order for the body to respond. That's how we're wired. In fact, the order of operations for our behavior goes like this: cognitions, then emotions, and then behavior. That's why we call it rational emotive behavior therapy. I put the word emotion in parentheses Because while it's also the case that your thoughts fuel your emotions, and it's true that your emotions come before you act, emotions do not themselves, contrary to popular belief, control your actions. Feelings don't do that. Cognitions dictate behavior. Your thinking dictates your behavior. So I want to explain this to you so you understand that our feelings and our actions are the result of our thinking. And since often the way we think about things can be irrational, erroneous, or certainly, like when I was a 14-year-old kid, very incomplete, we can often end up feeling unnecessarily miserable and in behaving in ways that hurt us and hurt others. Not to mention, how do we grow in holiness? So as I've said earlier, it's the lies we believe that we in turn tell ourselves and others that exacerbate our misery. So let me illustrate this truth with a thought experiment. First, let's imagine we have a nice big classroom with doors at either end of the room. Now let's imagine that we have a volunteer for our experiment, some college student who needs a little extra money. We'll call him Sam. Sam won't be injured in this study, but we are going to introduce Sam to some stimuli. That's what therapists do. It's what psychologists do. And with our high-tech monitoring systems, we will be able to observe Sam's behavior, and we'll also be able to exactly read his mind, his physiology, and his emotions. It's fascinating technology, I know. So we'll start by asking Sam to go and sit in a chair at the back end of the room by the back door. We put a blindfold over his eyes, and we tell him, just relax, Sam. The experiment's going to start soon. So we tell him, we're going to step outside of the room. Just hang out here. We go check our equipment, and sure enough, Sam is sitting there thinking of nothing at all. He's just relaxing. His blood pressure and heart rate are normal. He's feeling very peaceful. Now, a few minutes later, we have our assistant, ever so quietly, go open the door to Sam's room and have her let in the man-eating lion we've been starving for a few days. Now, she quickly takes the lion off the leash, shuts the door, and heads back to our monitoring equipment. There is now a huge, hulking, man-eating lion in the room, and it's slowly padding its way toward our volunteer. We check our monitors. No change in his thinking, no change in his physiology, no change in his feelings, no change in his behavior. Sam is still sitting quietly in his chair, totally at peace, totally relaxed. Why isn't he up and running for his life? You know why. Even though there's a man-eating lion in the room, he has not yet become aware of that fact. Well, being the ethical scientists that we are, we announce over the PA, Sam, we just put a hungry man-eating lion in the room. You should make a run for the back door immediately. But our monitors reveal that Sam just sits there and smiles. And we can see from the monitors that he's experiencing a little spike of joy. I'll use that as an opportunity to take a drink. Thank you. See how God can use things as blessings? It's amazing what he can do. He's feeling a little spike of joy. We read the thought monitor and we can see exactly what Sam is thinking. Those scientists are having a little fun with me, ha. Trying to make me think there's a man-eating lion in here. That's ridiculous. No, Sam, we shout back over the PA, there really is a man-eating lion in the room. You got to get out of there. Please, get out quick. And we check the monitors again, and Sam, he's just still sitting there. He just thinks we're fooling with him. Now the lion's getting closer now, so we shout into the PA, Sam, the experiment's over. Take the blindfold off. Take the blindfold off. The experiment's over. Sam finally complies, takes the blindfold off, and promptly runs out the back door. Just like you and I would. Sam survived. No one was injured. We go and check our data, and we see that as soon as Sam became aware that there was a lion in the room, when he saw the lion, when he perceived it, he said, that's a hungry man-eating lion. I want to live, so I'm getting out of here. As a result of seeing the lion and believing it to be a threat, he felt terrified. His body responded by flooding his blood and muscles with adrenaline, all of which powered him to run right out of the room. Now, as observers of this experiment, we can ask the question, why did Sam run out of the room? First, did he run out of the room because his body was flooded with adrenaline? No. Adrenaline does not make us run. It just helps us run. Our body's physiology does not drive our behavior. We often think it can, and we often reduce explanations for conditions like depression and anxiety to misfiring neurons, an imbalance of neurotransmitters, or genes. But the brain and body chemistry, while that is partly true, they do not have a monopoly on decision making. I'm reminded of a friend who shared with me recently Some research he'd come across that demonstrated that genes played a significant role in obesity. Not smugly at all, I retorted, which gene did they identify as the one that puts people in line at McDonald's? Genes and body chemistry, while influential, they don't run the entire show. If it's not just our biology that dictates our actions, it must be that our biology at least dictates our feelings. Since we can't directly control our feelings, which would mean that by the law of transitive properties, it's our emotions that drive behavior, right? Are we off the hook now? Well, that's an impressive bit of tricky word algebra. Let's test it out. Do feelings run the show? Did Sam run out of the room because he felt terrified? No. Of course not. We don't always run when we're scared. We have a word for that. It's called bravery. History is full of people going ahead and doing the very thing they're scared of. Reminds me of my wedding day. No, wait. Just kidding. Skydiving, fighting in a war, obviously. For lots of people, public speaking. How about for us Catholics? Going to confession. I know I have to muster a little courage each time I go. It's a mark of maturity to face our fears. And while feelings are influential in our decision-making process, just like biology is, feelings are downright persuasive. They never make the final call. We can't ever blame our feelings for our actions because our feelings follow from our thinking. So finally, what about blaming circumstances for our behavior? Did Sam run because there was a lion in the room? No. The lion was in the room for a full 5 seconds and Sam just sat there not moving. The lion is not the reason. Now this is going to be a very important point, perhaps the hardest of anything I have to say tonight. Circumstances, especially the circumstances of our past, do not dictate our actions, our feelings, nor our thinking, nor our destiny. But how often do we hear people blame their actions on circumstances with phrases like, my life went off the rail when my parents got divorced. Or, of course I feel worthless. My parents told me I was my whole childhood. Or, for my parolee caseload, well, when you grow up in a neighborhood like I did, you're bound to get caught up in some trouble. Or from couples who are on the verge of divorce. We're just so busy that we don't have any time for each other. So if it were circumstances alone, we'd have to think deterministically, rather like Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, that every child whose parents got divorced, was told she was worthless, grew up in that neighborhood, and had a busy life was destined for failure. And we know that's not true. There's just too many exceptions. There's too many saints who arose from those ashes. The crux of our woundedness and the healing we desire is found in what we came to believe and continue to believe about the messages we heard and the circumstances we found ourselves in. It's not the life we live as much as it is the story we tell ourselves about the life we're living. I told myself I was worthless because my father wasn't taking care of his family. And I believed that meant that I wasn't worth taking care of. Sam ran out of the room because he told himself that lion is dangerous and I want to live. I didn't depress because my dad wasn't around, and Sam didn't run because of the lion. Sam ran because he perceived a threat and chose to live, and I experienced depression because that's the consequent feeling to thinking that you're valueless. Depression isn't sadness, by the way. It's emptiness. It's more like a nothing inside when you know there should be a something. In the same way, I didn't become a troubled youth because my parents got divorced, or because I had an absent father, or because I lived in poverty. I became a troubled youth because I had explained the story I was in which I had a lot of missing information, as that of a kid who isn't valuable. I had convinced myself that I was worthless. Now, were there real and significant reasons for coming to believe that? Absolutely, yes. I could find reasons for that. But the truth is, I was then, and I am now just as valuable as anyone else. The truth is that each of us are priceless, regardless of who acknowledges that or not. Now, I'm not saying a 14-year-old kid would have easily believed this. It would have taken a lot more information to come to that conclusion. But without coming to that conclusion, without correcting that mistaken belief, I definitely would have been trapped in that prison of pain, anxiety, and depression forever. And most of us need a lot more information. We need more accurate information about the circumstances we are living in, the experience of our pain. Starting with perhaps understanding that it is our beliefs, especially about the value and meaning of our lives, even in the midst of dire life circumstances, that determine our fate. That's never been better tested than in the field of psychology than in the life of Jewish psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Some of you might know who he is. Frankl was a student of Freud's in the early 20th century. He was living in Austria, unfortunately, at the start of World War II. He became imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps at Dachau and Auschwitz. The Nazis had marched his parents, his brother, and his wife off to other camps. After he was liberated, he had learned that they died in the camps. He survived. His life had been ripped away from him. But being the ardent student of the soul that he was, it didn't take him long within those circumstances for him to formulate the basis of his existential therapy called Logotherapy. Logotherapy is an approach built on the work of Søren Kierkegaard. If you don't know Kierkegaard, he's a Christian philosopher who is acknowledged as the first existentialist, ahead of Nietzsche and Sartre, both of who missed out on a lot of important information that he was talking about. And Frankl posited, as Søren did, that our primary drive is that of a will to meaning, rather than what Freud posited, which was we all have a will to pleasure, or Freud's other student, Adler, who said we all have a will to power. It was Frankl who said, no, primarily we are driven toward meaning. He knew this because he realized that after even everything had been taken from him, his family, his wealth, his status, even his personal liberties, he declared that in the end there was one thing the Nazis could not take from him, and that was his ability to choose how he would live his life. In his seminal book, Man's Search for Meaning, please read that book, he describes that while he was forced to live in the worst possible circumstances, starved, widowed, forced to work as a slave, that he would not surrender his will to do good. He was still a doctor after all. He still saw himself as a doctor. And even though he was forced to live beneath what is humane, he himself would not live beneath his humanity. He spent those years fastidiously caring for his bunkmates, offering them encouragement, sometimes bits of medicine when he found them. Frankl believed that his life still had meaning and purpose, and he pursued that, and that was what he considered the source of his happiness and his way to finding healing. If he chose to take responsibility for his life and pursued what was most meaningful, regardless of the hell that surrounded him. Now that's a long story about demonstrating the fact that it's our perceptions and the beliefs we hold, the story we tell ourselves about the circumstances we're in, and we often only have limited information that account for our experience in life. If we are wounded, it's because of what we believe. It's not because of what happened to us, what other people did or didn't do to us. Because our feelings are outside, or because our feelings are outside our sphere of influence, they are not. Neither are we slaves to our biology, predestined to live out whatever genetic lottery has been handed to us. This is very important. We are not helpless victims. Now, I say all this because so often the story of the lie that people tell when they tell me the origins of their pain start with blaming. They give me phrases like, they make me so anxious. No one recovers from that kind of trauma. Depression just runs in my family. Or, I should have known better. Can you hear the lies in there yet? We don't have time to dissect all of those, but maybe you're starting to. I'll share with you one that was particularly ridiculous from one of my tough guy parolees. I had been counseling him for a couple of weeks, and he came in and sat down in the chair across from me, and he said, "You know what, Owens, I figured you out. You're trying to make me gay." That was a pretty obvious one to spot. No, sir, that is not what I'm here to do. He couldn't even hear the lie in that. That was true for him. Now, I hope we can all agree by now that it's not the experiences we've endured that wound us as much as it is the beliefs that we hold regarding those experiences. And if it is our beliefs, we only have two options. One, scrub the brain clean of the memory of the trauma. And that's what a lot of people attempt to do. Listen to my last Lumen Veritatis lecture. They try to annihilate painful memories with alcohol, drugs, or they try to ignore them by overshopping, overworking, overcompensating, etc. Or two, we can reframe the picture in our heads. We can take the story we're telling ourselves and ask if there isn't a different script that can be run. A larger, more accurate, informed, honest, empowering story. Now, I would never suggest that you can do any of this on your own. I firmly believe we cannot do it alone. It's really hard to see ourselves and hear ourselves objectively in the way that I can hear it, in the way that you can hear others speak. And besides, trying to do anything on our own is usually part of the problem anyway. Why? Because we were made for relationship. We need each other. Even Jesus demonstrated this fact to us most humbly, getting his cross to Calvary. Even the King of the universe, who fell 3 times, needed help getting it done. He showed us we need each other. So how is healing going to happen to me for me then? Should I just wait for better circumstances to fall out of the sky? Is healing going to fall into my life somehow? Is the lighthouse keeper just going to get in a boat and come out and rescue me and drag me to shore? Am I going to sit around waiting for the miracle drug that claims it can lift my depression, even though I've largely come to despise the person I am and detest the life I live? Or the drug that promises to relieve all anxiety, even though I truly should be frightened of trying to go on alone in my life, absent the deep, meaningful relationships I need? Am I going to resign myself to just sitting out here in the storm all by myself? Or am I going to put my hand on the rudder and start bringing my ship to port? Or if I'm too weak to do that right now, which often we are, will I be so humble as to ask someone to help me do that? Ask someone to help me carry that cross, at least for a little while. As I wrap up this lecture, I think that's the best piece of practical advice I can give you. If you want to seek healing, ask someone to help you deliberately. A friend, a spouse, a counselor, maybe even a priest. Certainly Jesus. We got a really good priest here, so I would go with that one. I don't believe we can find healing on our own. I don't think we're meant to. It's my own personal belief. I don't believe we're meant to. There's just too much of us that is in shadow. Both Tolkien and Jung knew this. They wrote about shadow a lot. I can't get enough of my own perspective on my own. I can't get enough perspective on myself on my own. And I don't have all the answers that I need. But I do believe that we can find them among us. In searching together, we may find enough to get us to shore. So in closing, I'll say this. The psychology of healing is just that. It's not a psychology of simply surviving or even of just coping. My podcast is not titled The Coping Road or The Surviving Road. It's called The Healing Road. The psychology of healing is a disposition towards truth itself, or better put, in fact, best put, the psychology of healing is a disposition toward truth himself. In closing, I'll say this. Nothing and no one else can set us free. Thank you.
For Q&A. If anyone has questions, please do frame those questions in the form of a question. All right? Okay.
Yes, there's a question over there. Yes, please, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that really powerful and awesome talk. I was wondering, through your years of experience, are there any policies that you could recommend for the state to help us better seek others?
Policy recommendations from the state. Well, unfortunately, being as that I'm involved in education, I would see that we don't have a whole lot of people like me around doing the work that needs to be done. It would be helpful if we had more policy for school counselors, for example, who could do school counseling. I have a wife who's a school teacher, and many of my friends are school teachers. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, because a lot of this stuff, as it did with me, originated in my childhood and then just hung on with me through my 20s and 30s. That's the first thing that comes to mind now. We need more counselors. That's why I teach, to try to produce more. And in particular, we need more male counselors, not because they can do anything better or differently, but just some men, they won't go see a counselor unless it's another male counselor. They just won't do it. And so there's plenty of men who aren't getting counseling. Yes, sir.
12 steps starts with I'm powerless and I need a higher power.
Absolutely, yep.
How does that match up with what How do you blend it?
I almost referenced some of the 12 steps in here because they're beautiful. They're a good roadmap. The history of the start of the 12-step program starts with Carl Jung. I don't know if you know that, but there was a client who came to Carl Jung and has been suffering from depression, and the story goes, he tried everything, he couldn't be helped by anything, and Carl Jung said, well, I've heard some people have found help if they have a religious conversion. You could go try to have one of those. Okay, funny, right? I think if no one has read the 12-step program, take a look at it, because it will tell you to say things like, I'm not God, there is a God, I'm not God, and I've made mistakes, and it would be wise for me to start making reparations for some of those mistakes. So I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily be able to go through all 12 steps and say how it links up here exactly, but 12-step programs are called spiritual programs. Very often, if you can't afford counseling and there's open AA meetings, those can be good for you. They're also, I can't endorse every AA or NA group out there either. There's the 13th step. If you want to know what that is, ask me later. It's not a good one. So there's some things that happen there that aren't always great, but 12-step programs are not bad. They can be very awesome. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if you're familiar. I watched a movie last night with my daughter. I had seen it before, but she had not seen it. Called The Spitfire Drill.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a phrase, the main character is in her early 20s and she just got out of prison for justifiable manslaughter.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, do you think it's possible that the healing can be more painful than the wound itself?
Oh, definitely. I've seen the film. Healing is typically more painful than dealing with the wound, almost always. This is why people stay in the pattern of woundedness, because to get out of it is going to be, in counseling we say we're going to stir the pot, it's going to get messy, and you're going to have to, it can be heartbreaking, but it can be exhilarating, and it's absolutely liberating and freeing. But this is another reason that people avoid getting into doing the work of healing. It's not even complicated work, folks, I'll tell you. It's not like you need to go to therapy for 16 weeks or 2-3 years. I've seen people healed in 90 minutes. And I'm not saying that without experience and expertise behind it. And now some people it takes a long time because it's hard to have the conversation with them. Some people show up, they're ready to have the conversation, and their face and body changes, and they're changed forever. I mean, it can be miraculous. Now, not everybody should expect that, but it can be very difficult for some and take longer for others, but it can be very quick for others. So, yes, sir.
Jim, I really appreciate your personal story that you shared in your presentation.
Thank you.
Ask a personal question.
Yep.
What was the breakthrough for you? What was the thing that helped you to see the need to accept healing or
For me?
breakthrough, I guess, for you, if that's something you can answer?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Well, for me, it happened in a couple of different ways. It involved counseling and praying together for me. Going to counseling for me was a good way of getting all the data out on the table. I'm sort of left-brained in this way. But it helped me explore everything that I had come to believe about myself and the reasons I had come to believe those things. And that did take about a year. I went to therapy for about a year at that point in my life. And I experienced a lot of little healings along the way. But at the end of that year of counseling, while I experienced some highs and some relief and some healing, some real genuine healing, what it had done for me was, like I said, put everything out so I could see everything clearly, because I had an expert sitting across from me going, that doesn't sound exactly right. For example, I thought when I was 11 years old and my father had left, my grandmother came into the home and told me, well, we had 4 kids in the house, and my mom, she looked at me, and my grandmother said, well, you're the man of the house now. And I believed her, and I tried to be that as an 11-year-old. And my therapist, I remember him telling me, does that make sense for an 11-year-old to be the man of the house? I'm like, not really. Why did I believe that? Because I wanted to help. I mean, it was all good intentions. So I learned a lot of those kinds of things along the way because I had a good therapist going, does that sound right? Let's revisit that again. Does that sound right? And then it came finally in a moment of just deep understanding, as the best way to put it, that who I really was mad at. I was mad at my earthly father for abandoning me. Kind of not really. Which father was I really mad at for the circumstances of my life? That one. So my pain was in the relationship with the one above, not the one to my left or my right. And when I had realized, because I could see clearly from the station I was at in life, that he had not abandoned me. I mean, I saw he had not abandoned me. He had been there. I didn't starve. We didn't freeze to death. My life I love my life. It's a beautiful life I have now. And I know he carried me into this. So it just became enough evidence to show that he had not abandoned me. So I hope that answers it. You can buy the book. I'm working on it. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, sir. And then we'll get this. Yeah.
Besides curiosity, there's more behind my question than curiosity. Did any of you in that classroom tell this guy, no, that's not right? I mean, you're all trained psychologists, including the guy telling you, we ran a little late.
I did not say that to that person, no. I did say it to the person sitting next to me. That person will remain nameless, and the entire circumstances have been tweaked a little to hide the identity of any of these people. But yes, I did comment it to my classmate. And I laughed. I said, did you hear that? Yeah. Yes, ma'am. Sister.
I'm intrigued by your idea of the misuse of words and sort of hiding behind misattribution or whatever.
Yeah.
But do you think that always stems from woundedness, or is there a way that it could just be from like, general sinful tendencies? Or does sin always come from woundedness?
Well, it is sometimes from sin. It's not only from sin. In my view, it is it's vulnerability, the fear of being vulnerable that puts us to use those words very often. In the case, like Adam had sinned by eating the fruit, and then he continued to sin by trying to blame somebody. So did the blaming come from the previous sin? Not really. It was its own new sin. Maybe the second sin ever recorded. Blame. I don't know. But it often comes from, I mean, we speak those ways to defend from getting another arrow in the heart. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's... So is it really the question would be, is it sinful to walk around with the disposition of fear? Sure it is. We have a God. I mean, we have a God. What are we worried about? I mean, we need to take care and pay the bills, but we have a God. Yes, ma'am.
What are your thoughts on EMDR and mindfulness?
So here's what I would say about counseling techniques, of which there are many. I talked primarily about CBT. You're bringing up eye movement desensitization. There's all kinds of types of therapy. And I'll tell you this as a professor who trains counselors and trains people in what's effective. The number one thing that makes a counseling technique effective, such as EMDR or CBT or whatever it might be, is if the client believes it will be effective. I'm not making that up. Oh boy, it's like my whole talk. If you believe it will be effective, then it will be effective. If I, for example, the classic Hollywood scene of seeing a therapist is I lay on a Chase lounge and I free associate about my dreams and my childhood, and the guy's back there or the woman's back there taking notes. If I expect that to happen and I walk into a therapist's office and they say, we're going to do a sand tray, I want you to recreate your family here with these figurines, I'm like, what is this? That's not going to help me. Am I supposed to lay out on a couch and tell you about my dreams last night? Vice versa. So, whatever you're expecting to happen there, the number one 60% of all, even up to 75% of all the effectiveness of counseling has to do with rapport, which is based on, do you think healing happens the same way I think healing happens, counselor? Yeah, so EMDR is great for people who think it will help for them. Yep. Beliefs are powerful. Thank you, sir.
Last one.
Okay, one more. Last one. Mr. Allstott.
I'm trying to think how to phrase this, but with your experience of healing ministry here at the parish, the healing teams, your experience in counseling, how would you describe that method?
Again, I think I'll repeat the question. Thanks for asking. I usually do that. So the question is, what's the connection between counseling and healing ministry like what we have going on at this parish? Again, it's sort of a similar response that I gave earlier, which is God can do anything. He could do a grace and a miracle. But the standard way that things happen is you kind of have to know what to talk about or have somebody to notice the things that you've said or that you believe. And I've experienced the prayer ministry here, and they've been great experiences for me, and they definitely help with other kinds of wounds that I've carried around. Maybe the counseling lays a lot of them out, and maybe the spiritual healing the prayer ministry can be a little more surgical, a little more. Because when I've gone for spiritual healing, it's usually over a particular issue, and when I went to counseling, it was like, I'm a mess. Can we get in there and try to see what's going on? Open the hood up, and then they're like, you're missing parts and stuff is rusted, and So, and Father Steve and I have talked about this, but counseling has its place in terms of, I think, getting all the information out. But who knows? I mean, you're not probably going to get the miraculous grace if you don't open up to either of those things. I mean, I think the Lord could bless you walking down the sidewalk and all of a sudden you're healed. He could do that. That's not the ordinary way. The ordinary way is, come on now, start talking about it. Yeah. God bless you guys. Thank you.